Okay, we're starting up again. Thanks very much for coming back and participating in the last part of our symposium today. We have a fantastic panel set up, and these are all wonderful people that I'm lucky enough to know. And I put the names on the slides, so we have a little bit confusing overlapping names. This is Lynn, and this is Jean, Sybil, Jeannie, and Linda. So we've got a Lynn and a Linda and a Jean and a Jeannie, and Sybil, thank goodness you're in the middle. So, okay, so I have a few questions in mind myself to get things going. And please, people in the audience here at Stanford, if you have questions, hold up a little green question card. Our lovely assistants will come around and get your card. And if you're online on Zoom, then just enter the question in the Q&A box, and one of our lovely assistants will again fill out a green fluorescent green card for you. So, okay, we're great to start. So, and I'm going to ask a few questions about sexual intimacy. I don't think anybody will be too offended by what's said, but hopefully we'll be good. All right, so Lynn, I'm going to start off with you. One of the things I know from you is that you think the #1 recommendation is attending a support group meeting. So could you talk a little bit about the value of a support group meeting? Hold up the microphone. Oh, and if we could all keep our answers as short as possible so we can get as many questions in. Thank you.
I think that any caregiver who is not attending any kind of...
Is it on? I think it's on. Yeah, just a little closer. More like an ice cream cone. I think it's on. Pretty sure it's on.
Okay, any caregiver who is not or has not attended a support group, I recommend really strongly do, because fine, if you don't like it, you don't have to go back. But I found it incredibly helpful to get not only facts of people at different stages of the disease that let me know what was coming. And obviously it was great to be able to help other people who were going through what I've already gone through. But just knowing that there are other people out there dealing with what you're dealing with is incredible.
And Lynn continues to come to our support group, even though his wife passed away a couple of years ago, and we're glad to have him come back.
That makes it sound like an addiction. I have gone back twice,
Okay.
2 years apart, and found it wonderful to be able to hopefully help people struggling with what I struggled with.
Okay. And Jean, I know your dad has Lewy body dementia, and you live very near him. And if you could talk a little bit about your relationship with your mother, since of course she's in the picture and she's in some ways the primary caregiver. If you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, we live in a multi-generational building. So my husband and I live on top of my dad and mom. And yes, he was diagnosed in 2018, and then we got the dementia, which has now been considered Lewy bodies, which new development, which we probably already knew and you knew long ago. It's wonderful and hard. We're there for multiple things during the day. I participate with him every day, various times. And I think what's unique about my experience is that I'm caring for two parents, because the grief processing that my mom goes through is pretty intense. So I'm processing grief about losing my dad, and my mom is, and makes my voice shake every time I talk about it. But it's a unique experience, but if we didn't have each other, I don't know how we would do it. It's just, we need breaks. And so we have my husband, myself, and my mom, and so we all kind of rotate. She does do the primary. She's there all night with him. up all night. And so sometimes we have to do the day stuff.
Okay, right. Thank you. And Sybil, could you say a little bit about your husband has Lewy body dementia?
Yes.
Could you say a little bit about placement into a care facility?
Sure. He was
And hold
diagnosed.
that mic close.
He was diagnosed in 2014, and we're like, "What's that?" You know, we had no clue. And okay, and so I cared for him. It was a gradual process, but by about 2018, 2019, he lost his driver's license. He was needing more and more help, more and more care. And then, of course, in 2020, the pandemic hit and he got pretty bad, but I couldn't get help. I didn't feel comfortable having caregivers in the house. So it was all on me. And my daughter, Katie, helped, but she didn't come in, but she would bring food and do things that she could do. But it was very, very challenging. And so in 2021, I was able to get him into a daycare facility. I'd never even heard of one, and I wouldn't have known what it was without my caregiving group. And he loved it there, but obviously the disease was taking its toll. So I was getting people at home and different shifts, and it was very confusing and difficult to find the right people. And so about the end of the month, my daughters said, "Mom, you're going down. We need to place him." And that was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. But now looking back, it's good that I did what I did, because 5 months later, I got cancer and I needed care, you know. So he's content there. He's happy. They have activities. He recognizes us. He knows the people that work there, and it was the right choice that we had to make.
Thank you. And Jeannie, next to you, I know from talking to you at our support group meeting that delusions, particularly Capgras syndrome, have played a big role in your journey. Could you speak a little bit about that?
Yes, that was the most challenging, I feel, of his care. Capgras is when he feels there's an imposter. So I was an imposter of his wife. The house, although it had everything looked the same, was not his house. And he would, along with the delusions, he would see people in the house. And one time, without my knowing, he went into my wallet and took my driver's license and all my medical cards, and he brought them over to the neighbor for safekeeping. Because he saw women going in my purse, and he was really trying to protect me, you know. So when I needed my driver's license, and he finally went and got it for me. This was way in the beginning when he could do that. And I just said, "Thank you so much, honey. Oh, you just saved me so much time going to the DMV. You don't know. I'm so thrilled to have this back, you know." And, you know, seeing helicopters in the room and bugs on here and there, and it's just been ongoing, and I just, you know, deal with it. I've been supportive of it. I don't, I try to be in a loving way with him, because it's been devastating, and this is not him, you know, when you see your loved one so intelligent and just declining. And you know, one night he couldn't find the house. Where's my house? Where's my house? So we went out. I said, "Well, we're going to go find it." And we went for a drive, you know, and try to look for the house. And finally, when we got back to more familiar streets, he led me right home. And this is my house. I said, "Oh, good," you know. And so it's just been, you know, day to day. It's what comes up in the day and what you have to deal with the day. And 2022 was just really tough on me, and I placed him February 1st of this year. And, you know, pros and cons of it, but I just know I couldn't have continued this journey with him. And I think he's being cared for. It might not be to my expectations, but he's being cared for. And I don't have that physical stress. You always have the mental and the emotional stress.
Indeed. Okay, Linda, your father had Lewy body dementia, passed away several years ago as well. Could you speak a little bit about the hallucinations he experienced?
Well, initially, because my father was an athlete, he played tennis every day. He had to have rotator cuff surgery, which was a badge of pride for him in his 70s to have that kind of surgery because of his athleticism. And afterwards, when he was back home and friends would come over, my mother was taken aback because he would say, "Why is that little girl sitting here with us? Who is she?" And my mother thought perhaps it was somehow the anesthesia hadn't worn off. And so she was mortified and embarrassed. And she told me later, I didn't know what to say to the neighbors because your father kept talking about this little girl. Eventually, we got the diagnosis and she adapted to the fact that he was having hallucinations to the point where one morning she called me and she said, "Well, it turns out I think I live at the San Francisco Zoo because last night your father told me that there was a zebra in the bedroom with him. So when I came over, I said, 'Hey, Daddy, I heard there was a zebra in the bedroom with you. Are you sure about that?' And he said, 'Oh, absolutely,' because I leaned over and I patted it on the rump." And I'm like, okay. So I mentioned to Robin, in those instances, you want to laugh because otherwise you will cry.
Thank you. Lynn, back to you. When did you first have an inkling that your wife's diagnosis was really Lewy body dementia rather than Parkinson's disease? How did that come about?
The first inkling would have been, probably 8 years after diagnosis with Parkinson's. And we saw a neurologist and said that my wife was pretty sure there was something with her brain. She just wasn't thinking right. Her head wasn't working right. And since Parkinson's is a movement disorder, what did he think this could be? He said, "That's Parkinson's." No. Parkinson's is a movement disorder. No, it does that too. And we were totally shocked. Hindsight, her dementia symptoms pretty much coincided with movement symptoms. But movement, that's easy to be aware of. Dementia symptoms, no. First dementia symptoms were combativeness that had never been present in our relationship, which of course you assume it's a relationship in hindsight. Oh, that's what was going on. And the other is that she had to leave work on disability of her own choice because she just was dysfunctional in stressful situations. She had always been great at handling that all her life, and suddenly, when things got stressful, she just froze. Those were years before we went to the doctor and said her head isn't working right. But in hindsight, I think that Lewy body dementia was coincident with movement problems.
Okay. And Jean, could you speak a little bit about Jean with the G? Could you speak a little bit about hiring in-home care? I know that's been a real struggle in your family.
Yeah, I think similar to what Sybil was saying, for my mom, the thought of having someone inside the house, everything is upended as is. So to imagine a stranger coming in on top of it, there's no sense of comfort for her. There's no sense of anything that's stable. So then adding a stranger to it just seemed to be huge. And I think she wanted to carry the burden. So that has been a struggle. I think grief is the biggest factor in stopping some of the forward movement and getting help and getting support. We either move in the support realm and we go to group or we see a counselor, or we talk to someone, we have a witness to something that's happening, and then we can move forward on things. Or she sometimes chooses kind of the the long, painful route, which is we sort of have to watch her suffer, stay up all night, just endless kind of series of things, lose patience. And then sometimes she's like, okay, I'm ready. I'm at my wit's end. And it's really hard to watch someone sort of go through a car crash all the time, an emotional car crash. So she finally decided to bring someone in. We have her there a couple hours a week. There are struggles with that. It's never perfect, but the ball is rolling. So we're trying to keep that up, and it's kind of an everyday struggle to convince her to, extend, reach out, because if she goes down, the rest of us go down too. So if she's not available, then my husband and I are doing 24-hour care instead of all of us having some time in and out of taking care of him.
Okay, thank you. Sybil, could you also talk a little bit about the value of a support group to you? I know you attend several support groups.
I do. And I think going to a support group is the single best thing that I could have done, because there are people who have been through it, people who are going through it, people who are new to it, as I was, not knowing what to do, where to turn, what he needed, how to access help. Just your head is just full of all kinds of stuff that doesn't make any sense, and you are trying to make sense of it. And I think the support group is the best thing. And so I started out in a Parkinson's support group, and then when he got the Lewy body dementia, I continued with that and moved on to another support group that was for Lewy body. And then I have a third support group, which is just a group of ladies, friends, 5 women from my church. And we supposedly a book group, but we don't always get to the book. And it could take years to finish a book. But we talk about everything. We support each other. We cry on each other's shoulders. We all have stuff going on, and they are a tremendous support for me.
Thank you. Jeannie, could you speak a little bit about intimacy and the challenges of intimacy with somebody with Lewy body dementia?
Sure. I think of emotional and physical intimacy, and the loss of it. It's just been, one of the most difficult things. It's sadness. It's just sadness, not having him sit next to you. And that's intimacy too, we've been married 52 years. And I think it's just, after all these years, your love is just strong, and your love is permanent, and your love never wanes. And so with him not being home, it's it's just so different. I've never 52 years with him. He's sitting there with me watching Warriors together. Everything is just so different, and it's sad. And the intimacy, the emotional is just hard. Not getting a kiss, not getting a hug, not cuddling at night, not the warmth of being together. It's just hard. And I think it takes a toll on everybody. And I think we don't talk about it enough, but it's just a sadness for all of us who have to deal with this.
Thank you. Linda, could you speak a little bit about culturally appropriate in-home care?
So we had the revolving door of caregivers, starting with an agency and then with some personal referrals from when my father had been in skilled nursing at Sonoma Valley Hospital. And a lot of the nurses needed extra, pay, so they would do overnight shifts and so forth. But it was problematic because at one point it was better for both my father and my mother, both native Spanish speakers, to have someone who had a cultural sensitivity to them, their language, their culture, their expectations of how to be in terms of courtesy, respect, politeness, and so forth. And so we did then find the underground network of Spanish-speaking CNAs, one of whom trained her sister, younger sister, who was not a CNA, and became like a granddaughter to my father. And I remember one morning I was over there because I actually had moved in with my folks at this point, because during the period my father got really bad, my mother had a stroke. So she was paralyzed on the left side. And at that point, you know, again, I feel your pain, Jean, because I actually moved in with them. And at the time, being the childless single daughter and with a Hispanic background, the expectation was undoubtedly Linda's going to take care of mom and dad because Charlie and Georgie have their families. And I was alone at 4 miles from them from Sonoma. So yes, culturally, it was a huge help to find Spanish-speaking caregivers. It made my life a lot easier because my mother's level of comfort and trust was much higher because she could relate to them from that perspective.
Thank you. And Lyn, could you speak a little bit about the challenges of dealing with medications? I know you became something of a scientist in your approach to pharmacist, scientist, clinician, in your approach to medication. Could you, as briefly as possible, speak about medication?
I should start that my wife was diagnosed with Parkinson's in the year 2000, June 2000, died just before the pandemic. So over 20 years of caregiving. Yes, all the medications that Dr. Poston spoke about, yes, I had involvement with those at some time or other. 2 of them were really severe problems, and I'll even mention by name Mirapex is a dopamine agonist, kind of a substitute dopamine that I don't know how popular it is now, but it was felt that the longer a person could move with Mirapex, the longer their movement will be prolonged with Cinemet, levodopa. I'm not sure that's believed now, but my wife experienced severe side effects from Mirapex, accentuated combativeness, speaking to the psychotic side, skin rashes, ulcers, edema, outrageous, and each of those symptoms was being treated separately with an additional medication before we, and I think it was mostly myself, figured out that it was caused by Mirapex, and cutting back on Mirapex made a bunch of symptoms disappear instantly. So doctors mean well, but they prescribe medications, and if necessary, more medications. And it's really important for a caregiver to, 1, be aware of what medications and what changes there are, and 2, try to research them and be suspicious, because the answers aren't always obvious to doctors, and sometimes being close to the situation, you learn it yourself. I started a log at about year 9 or so of caregiving, of medications and changes in medications. And that log ended up being 23 typewritten single line pages long. And that was incredibly valuable a bunch of times. So even though you don't really know whether it's going to be a good med or a bad med, or a good change or a bad change, write down what the change was. And then, of course, you find yourself writing some symptoms, some really spectacularly horrendous day, things like that. And it's all really good information. So I urge that. I know I'm going too long.
Yeah, I'm
but
cutting you off.
very-
No, I'm cutting you off. You'll get a
Okay.
chance later. Don't worry. as you can tell, Lynn and I are good friends, so maybe not after this, though. Okay, Jean, I have a question for you. I know, and I didn't really think about this question until your last answer, so I'm sorry if it comes out a little convoluted, but I think you'll know what I'm saying. I know at our support group meetings, one of the things you've talked about is how the whole family cannot become overwhelmed with these problems, that you kind of have to parse things out in a way, and you can't want things to be different more than your mother does, because your mother's a primary caregiver. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think I sort of equate us to like a delicate ecosystem, and we've gone through this in a different situation. My husband's father had Parkinson's also and died 2.5, almost 3 years ago now. And we were an ecosystem there also, different, a lot more in-home care. And now we're doing it with Parkinson's, with dementia, which is now Lewy body. And I think the nature, as Christine, right, was speaking about the fluctuations. It gets so intense sometimes with dementia that there can be there were 4 weeks straight where my mom and dad didn't sleep because he was up all night, and one person can't do that. So we would sort of have to figure out day shifts, night shifts, not very organized, but we were patching it together. And she's almost 80 also, so there are physical limitations and financial hardships, bringing someone in, paying for that stuff, all those things happen together, and we're very close. We live close. I'd like to think we would probably help even if we didn't live close, but the physical proximity is real, and you can't not help. So I'm sort of meandering to the answer, but not one person can do it. Like, you can't do it mentally, you can't do it physically. I can bring cheer and exercise and memories, good conversation for a couple hours, and then I'm like, I feel like I'm going to go insane. And then my husband steps in and maybe does some, watching soccer, we innately rotate. And when I hear about people who are doing it by themselves, are not talking to anybody, don't have support, there's 3 of us, and I don't sometimes think we're going to make it. So it's essential for survival. Yeah.
Yeah. Sybil, could you talk a little bit, since your husband's now in a care facility, could you talk a little bit about how the caregiver's role is still not over? Even though your husband is placed in a care facility, you still got a lot of work to do.
Yes, that's true, because one of his medications I physically take over there because it's mailed to me and not directly to the facility. And they call me when anything happens. And just a little anecdote recently, I took a trip. I decided I wanted to go back to Michigan to see my other daughter for a week. And literally the early morning that the Uber was putting all my bags in the car, they called me and said, the ambulance is here and we're taking him to the hospital. He had fallen in the bathroom. He got up in the middle of the night thinking he was getting ready for work and fell. And since no one saw him, they didn't know if he hit his head or his hip or how he fell. So I, of course, canceled that flight, went to the hospital, and later that morning, they had done all the tests and they said he's fine, so we're sending him back. So I rebooked my flight the next day. So 3 days later, the day before I'm coming home, I get another call. He fell and we're taking him to the hospital. And so I said, well, I'm not home. I'm 5 hours away by air. And so call my daughter, Katie, and relay information to her. And so in texting back and forth on the plane, I found out that they had they had finally sent him back, no broken bones or anything. So next day, the morning of my flight, I'm at the airport. They call me again. We're sending him back to the hospital because he has pain in his hip, and they were supposed to check that, and we're not sure they did it. And so I'm like, I'm getting on a plane right now. I'll just have to be there in about 5 hours. And so when Katie picked me up at the airport, we just drove straight to the hospital. And he had been there since that morning, and it was probably about 3 o'clock or 4 then. I don't think he'd had anything to eat. I said, did he have anything to eat or drink? No. And because it wasn't considered an emergency that time, he was like on the bottom of the totem pole in terms of care. And so they finally released him and took him back, and he was just exhausted. I was exhausted. And so that's just one of the things. You get calls at all hours of the night, and I never know what to expect. Is this really an emergency? Is this really bad? And then try to make quick decisions about what to do, what to tell them, and analyze what the options are and what's going on. So it's difficult. I think he's in a good facility. The caregivers are awesome. It's just that, I'm the bottom line. And so it's still caregiving. It's still there. And try to take a day out, or a short trip or anything is kind of worrisome because you don't know what's going to happen. Anything can happen at any time. So you're never really totally off duty.
Yeah. And similarly, Jeannie, could you also speak to that about how, even though your husband is at a care facility, you're still in charge, you're still the caregiver?
Sure, you are managing his care still. You're not physically doing it, and sometimes I do physically do it when I go there. But I've received calls. He won't take his medication, and I'm 45 minutes from him. I don't know what I'm supposed to do, and you think they're going to figure it out, but they don't. And so my daughter had to run over the other night and, finally got him to take his medication. But it's ongoing. It's ongoing. You never, I went to our second home with his family, and it's a yearly thing we do. And I knew my daughter would be home, and yep, she got a call and had to go deal with it. And so I know that we cannot be gone at the same time. Someone has to be around to deal with the emergencies. So it's, the stress is really never gone.
Never goes away. Yeah. Yeah. Linda, could you speak a little bit about your relationship with your mother? She, of course, was the spouse and thought to be the primary caregiver, but you were intimately involved in as well. How did you manage all that?
Well, my mother and I should have gone into therapy because it was a battle of wills. I wanted to keep my father engaged and socialized and out and about and go to restaurants. And my mother was fearful that he was going to fall. On one occasion, we came back from having lunch, and my father at that point didn't want me to hold on to him as he walked. And this was sometime before we had to put a brace around him and use that to steady him. And when we got back to the house, my mother disappeared in the bathroom, and I heard weeping. And I said, Mom, what's happened? And she said, well, when you were guiding your father back to the car and he was weaving, I passed the people dining outside on the patio of this restaurant, and they pointed at him laughing, saying, look at that drunk going down the street. And so those moments for my mother were just beyond the pale and so hurtful that she wanted to keep him close and protect him, or more so herself, from what other people were observing and saying. So we would struggle with that. And I actually, after our serious fall that my father had, we decided they should sell their home in 2008, and they would move in with me. So I completely remodeled my home. My living room became my father's bedroom. Because of the sleep disorder, they could no longer sleep in the same room. So my mother was upstairs, but that was problematic because we didn't know what would happen in the middle of the night if he got up, which eventually he did hurt himself, but she then went on a day bed adjacent to him. It was, as you know, it's a roller coaster. As a result, we were in so much strife, my mother and I, about how to take care of my dad, that she said, you know what, I want to go home. The house didn't sell. It was a recession year. I want to go home. So because they only lived 4 miles from me, they went home. But then things got worse, and she would call me nightly. Your father won't go to bed. Your father won't take a shower. I need help changing him. I was over there constantly. And I finally said, you know what, this is physically exhausting. I'm going to move in with you. The problem became, now I was emotionally exhausted being there 24/7 with them. So it was a struggle for me and my mother. And finally, we reached this rapprochement, if you will, of coming to an agreement on the medication, on the caregiving, on the scheduling. You almost need someone as a mediator, or to help that structure be sustainable. It's hard to do it by yourself. So it's helpful if there's a third party who can say, like a social worker or even a therapist, here's how you parse out the responsibilities. Here's how you both take care of yourself.
Okay, thank you. All right, Lynn, back to you. I give you opportunity to say what you would like to say a few minutes ago with the mic up to you.
Very, very quickly, I hope.
Me
Dr.
too.
Poston mentioned Seroquel-Creatine, I believe, is a antipsychotic,
Oh, Seroquel.
antipsychotic
Mhm.
sedative, quite popularly given. And towards the end, when my wife was very combative, it was very useful for up to, let's say, 6 months. By 8 months, the dosage had been increased, and still wasn't working. And the notable incident was that I had an urgent appointment, my caregiving group, that I had to get my wife out of bed and downstairs on the stair lift. She was uncooperative, and I showed up at caregiving group with a huge bloody gash across my forehead. I went home from the group and researched that medication, Seroquel, and discovered that it is credited with a paradoxical effect on occasion, does the opposite. And yes, it incited my wife to bloody violence.
Okay, thank you. I guess that's a sad story. I remember that day. Keep questions coming in. Otherwise, I'll just keep asking my own questions. But if anybody has questions that could help, that'd be great, or things of interest. Jean, one thing that Dr. Poston mentioned and Christina Irving mentioned as well was fluctuating cognition. Does your father experience that, and how do you guys cope with that?
Yeah, I think early on in the diet, he had Parkinson's 2018, and then we got the Parkinson's with dementia in 2022, which is now our doctor is talking about Lewy bodies in our last week's appointment. So his cognitive function started, it was cooking things in a Pyrex bowl, but then also recalling like the minutia of a chronological series of events that happened in the 70s. Like it was amazing that I could ask him questions about his past and he was fine, but he couldn't sequence anything in present moment. And then the other fluctuations that really started to scare us is I thought he was having a stroke one day because his speech was, it was a series of strange words and sounds. But when we're like, oh my God, do we have to call an ambulance? And we could talk to him and he could hear us and he could give us hand signals like thumbs up or thumbs down. And he could he had motor functions, he knew what day it was. So we sort of navigated through this very bizarre series of cognitive impairments and mishaps, and we're settled in the middle of all of that. But the hallucinations are frequent, and I'm so glad that they don't freak him out. There's always the same father and daughter that are in a room, and he just can't sequence anything. Bathroom activities, nothing. There are things that are just completely gone. And then other things that are just he had a brilliant mind, so he can recite like the Latin names of plants sometimes. So, you just sort of go with it. It makes for interesting conversations. I know when he's going to a punchline of a joke, even if the words aren't lining up, I can see the small flex in his face. The communication has been the most noticeable cognitive impairment that we've seen.
Okay, thank you. Sybil, we have a question from the audience here. Given that caregiving is emotionally and physically exhausting, how have you been able to figure out resources to get by?
Well, when he was at home, and especially during 2020, it was really hard, and because there weren't any resources that I could rely on to help me during that period of time. But I think to find caregivers, once I could do that, before that, and then after that, before he was admitted to a facility, it was just kind of asking around, calling different agencies. I've since found out that there are actually professionals who can help you find care homes, but we went out looking, and I think that the biggest challenge was trying to find something that we thought might appeal to him. And I know that he loved athletics, and he was always very active and running in college and everything. And so we were trying to find caregivers that could help him or do things like that with him. And the boxing was a great idea for him for quite a while, which I learned through my caregiving group, and other people had taken advantage of that. And he loved that and anything that was active. And so trying to sort out things that he could do that he would enjoy was really a challenge.
Okay, thank you. Jeannie, could you talk a little bit about your husband's first symptoms of dementia, and if you second guessed yourself as to whether they were really going on or was something else happening?
Yes. In 2018 and 19, he was diagnosed with atrial fib. So they did an ablation. They put a Watchman in his heart. And so he was, cared for medically and had these procedures. And then the next year he had back surgery at Stanford. And all along my daughter is saying, you got to get Dad checked, Mom. Something's not right with him. I said, Beth, let everything calm down. He's had a lot going on. I mean, if anybody had a lot going on, it was him. And I said, let's get things calmed down. But of course, and I think a lot of us, you don't want to see it yourself, So he was seen by a neurologist and tested, and then the following year tested again, and he had really declined in his cognitive. And then we got to Stanford and had the full-blown test. But the hallucinations really came first. And we have a second home, and we were sitting there, and our neighbor has like a aluminum boat, and he said, look at the guy there, in the boat. And the whole family is around the table, and there is no guy there. And, it just was like, what is going on here? And then one night he was curled up in another bedroom in the corner. And it just, this is his hallucinations and so, and that it just, hallucinations and delusions, it just was solid and just very hard to deal with. But that was the first. I mean, then the memory came later, but he, the doctor's message and also Christina's, the apathy, as I look back now, what he hasn't kept up in our home or our rentals, it just clicked with me that he just wasn't able to do it, and just did not have the incentive, the drive, anything. He just couldn't function, I believe, to get anything done. So now I'm dealing with that.
Yeah, thank you. Linda, how about for your father? What were the first symptoms of dementia or hallucinations? Which came first, and what were some of the first symptoms?
Well, in retrospect now, I can think back to 1997, and I was working in Australia, and my mother and father came to visit, and he exhibited some behaviors that my mother found disturbing, but she found them like unusual or odd, and maybe more a reflection of he wasn't being considerate of her because they had gone on a tour, and in the middle of lunch with the rest of the tour group, he got up, walked away, and was wandering in front of the building. And she came home and said, "I can't believe your father left me alone with these people. It was so embarrassing." And I'm like, "Oh, gee, Dad, what's going on?" He says, "No, I just need to get up." And I can think of that now as one of the earlier episodes. And another time on a trip where it was designed for him and he wasn't showing any interest in any of the things we were doing. And it wasn't until many years later that it all started to come together. And then eventually my mother revealed what was going on, because we had one Thanksgiving. For me, Thanksgiving's a hard holiday. But she walked in the door and I was hosting, and she immediately started weeping, saying, "Don't ever put your father in an institution. Don't ever put your father in an institution. You're going to kill me if you do." And I'm like, "What are you talking about? This is our Thanksgiving family meal, and you've come in crying with this demand." It really put a pallor over the whole evening. And then I remember, now I realize she was experiencing all the signs and not sharing them with me and my siblings because she was afraid. She was afraid to confront it. So I think when he, as an avid tennis player, stopped going to the courts, that was another indication. And he started having balance issues. So we ran the gamut of going to the Mount Seton balance clinic to see what was wrong with him in that regard. Then we went to the sleep disorder neurologist, and he went to that clinic twice and spent the nights there. And on the second visit, the doctor said to us, "Your father's problems are more serious than sleep apnea or sleep disorder. You need a referral." So we took him to the UC Davis Alzheimer's Research Center, and they did the full workup, and they told us it was LBD. And we similarly were like, "What is that? We've never heard of it. This can't be right." So we didn't believe it until we came down to CPMC and Dr. Catherine Madison, who after 10 minutes with my dad stepped out in the hallway with my brother and I and said, "Your dad is the poster boy for LBD." And so at that point we had to deal with it because, there was no going back. The doctor said something to us that day that threw us all into a tizzy, and if you will, because she said to my mother, holding her hands, "You're losing him." And we thought that meant he was dying. But we didn't really understand what was ahead of us. So I'm, again, so grateful to Robin for organizing an event like this and for so many people to be zooming in, because the more you know and the more you understand, the sooner you can get the right help and the proper resources.
Okay, thank you. Sybil, I'd like to ask, I'm going to stop the line, because this is, I think, a perfect question for you from the audience. What will happen, is your husband in a memory care facility?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
What will happen if the memory care facility can no longer care for your husband, for example, refuses medication or physical violence? Have you know anything about that or thought anything about that?
I don't.
Maybe
He-
you could speak to that first care facility you guys tried to
Oh,
get your
yeah.
husband in. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So my daughter Katie and I, we made a list and we had certain criterion. We wanted it to be, we probably live 10, 15 miles apart. So we were looking for something that was kind of halfway in between us. And then we wanted a place that, had activities that of the kind he would enjoy and so forth. So after looking at, I don't know, maybe 6 or 8 places, we decided on one. And we said, yeah, this is perfect. So we signed up. And the day that we went over to, consummate the deal with the check and everything else to get him totally in, they said, oh, by the way, we can't take him. And we're like, why? Why not? We jumped through all the hoops. We got the doctor's report. We did everything. Well, it's because he has a CPAP machine, and we can't allow anyone to have a CPAP machine. And we said, well, why not? Well, because it's something like oxygen. And we're like, no, it's not. Anyway, they just wouldn't budge at all, and they flatly refused to take him. And I've since asked a couple of his doctors, and they said, we've never heard of anything like that. That's ridiculous. But we moved on, and we did find another place. And I don't
No
know.
problem with the CPAP at the new place.
No problem with the CPAP at the new place. It's smaller. It has a smaller population of dementia patients, which is good, and a lot of care. And they've never really refused to do anything. Now, he's not violent at all, but he is ambulatory, but he falls a lot. And I know that takes up a lot of their time, because once he gets up from a chair, somebody has to run right over there and, kind of guide him to wherever he wants to go, or let him sit down. They're quite warm toward him. And when he did have those 2 falls, there's those 3 trips to the ER, I said, what am I going to do about these falls? And they said, well, you could get one of those mats that goes by the bed, and if he gets up in the night, it sends off an alarm to the nurse's station. And I said, that's brilliant. I had no idea something like that existed. But the only thing he does do, but they just laugh about it sometimes. He thinks he's at work. And so he'll try to boss them around, or, he thinks they're his employees, and he's a very nice employer. They all tell me that. But one time and maybe more than once, he's actually answered the phone at the nurse's station. And he'll say, human resources, can I help you? And the person that called was from the kitchen, and they thought they dialed wrong and hung up. But he tries to kind of be in charge, and if you ask him, he's mentoring all of those young people. He's mentoring them. So one young man that was particularly attached to him was, I guess, telling Dick about, how did you manage to get in your career? And I just don't know what I want to do. And so just out of the blue, my husband said, you should go get that book, What Color is Your Parachute? Now, I don't know, if you're not at least 70, you wouldn't even know what that is. But that was a book. I don't know when it came out, but it was about finding your passion in life and your career and what you want to do. And so that young man actually did buy that book. And unfortunately, his passion, I guess, was not where he was because he did leave. But we've never had any problem within the caregivers or the facility expressing any concern, any unwillingness to do anything that he needs. They're just lovely people. They really are. And I understand when he falls, they can't be with him one-on-one, you know, but they do their very best. So it has never been a question of, you know, of them refusing to do anything.
Okay, that's great. Thank you,
Mhm.
Sybil. Lynn, one of the attendees here has asked if you could speak a little bit about end of life experience and bringing on hospice
Sure.
with the microphone.
Long before I felt that hospice was appropriate, my wife had a experience objecting to a caregiver who wanted to bring her in out of the cold. And the caregivers said that she should be evaluated for hospice. Okay, I cooperated. Turned out to be really great because hospice did evaluate her, said that
That's for me, not for you.
okay, that that no, she wasn't ready for hospice, but Mission Hospice has a volunteer program for people who will go into hospice. And that program provided a volunteer who came by to visit with my wife at least once a week. For a while, it was twice a week. And that was great social interaction for her. So I speak very highly of Mission Hospice for that. And then, of course, when it was truly hospice time, they were very supportive to my wife in hospice at our home.
Okay, thank you. Linda, could you speak a little bit about that as well, hospice
Hospice.
and end of life?
Well, the hospice referral comes from the physician. And as it turned out, my father graduated from hospice twice, but we still had the hospital bed at home. And at the last go around, the hospice care from Hospice of the North Bay was phenomenal. I think we would have lost our minds without them. They were loving, caring, spent time with my mother because my father was already out of it. And by the end of life, and I was telling my sister, I found an old computer and I was looking through videos and I thought, oh, I found a video of the daddy at end of life and he is skeleton. He's lost all muscle tone and he was a 6'1" athletic man who was looking completely wasted and gaunt. And it was really hard to see that descent physically. And so I think he died at home as we had intended because we did at one point when his sleep disorder was so pronounced, we did believe that it might be better for him to be in a facility, memory care facility. But he was in and out within a week's time because even though my mother was there daily for his breakfast and lunch, somehow they weren't giving him his medication correctly. And by the end of the week, he was going into renal failure. And he was rushed to the emergency room and we transferred him back from Petaluma to Sonoma, where at least there, the hospitalist was smart enough to say, your father's on too many medications. We have to wean him off a bunch of stuff and kind of stabilize him. And it was actually that episode that prompted my mother wanting to go back home because he had stabilized and he could actually have conversations with us. Because there were moments where he looked was catatonic and could not engage. And I think it was because we didn't have the medications aligned properly. So I think the hospice care was phenomenal. So I think those of you who have found the right facilities, and I think they're getting better all the time, are very fortunate because even though we placed him in a location that was recommended by a neighbor of mine who coincidentally was the executive director of Hospice of the North Bay and had her aunt there and told me they were great. It was not a great experience for us. So, and of course he had taken a fall and he was lying in a patch of urine for I don't know how long when they discovered him. So there were things that were not right. And fortunately we got him out of there in time.
Thank you. Jeannie, this is somebody asking for advice, and I think you might be well placed to offer some advice based upon your experience. Says, my spouse has Lewy body dementia, does not want anyone to come stay overnight or during the day to help. And I'm supposed to get a hip replacement operation and have rehab. What should I do?
Well, I had a knee problem for I don't know how many years, and I was scheduled for a replacement. And for Friday and the Tuesday, my husband went wacko at a board and care facility. He disassembled the alarm system, and he's very clever, and escaped. And I heard a knock on the door at 1:30 in the morning, and it was the sheriff's, and he was in the back of the car. So he could not stay at that facility. When I took him to the emergency room at Peninsula Hospital, and all his meds had to be reevaluated. He stayed a week, and I told my daughter at that time, I'm canceling the surgery. Your father's in the hospital. There's no. Mom, we've already lost Dad. We can't lose you. You got to get better. You have to take care of Dad. You have to be in good shape. I said, well, this is all going to fall on you. I can deal with it. And she did deal with it. She placed him by her home in Danville, and I live in Burlingame, so I am driving there, but that's okay. And she took everything in stride and has been my rock. And just like Katie, you're your mom's rock, thank goodness. She's been a blessing, and I couldn't do this journey without her. So we have to take care of ourselves.
Absolutely.
We have to.
Could you speak also a little bit about your son? I know your son does things for you guys and your husband in a different way than your
Yes,
daughter.
he's very different, of course. And he lives in Sparks, Nevada. And so he comes down once a month to see his dad. And we go directly to my daughter's house and we stay there. She has an area we can stay. And, he doesn't really see all that we see, of course, the daily, and has a hard time really accepting it. He says, Dad's the same. And I'm looking at him like, Dad is not the same. And that's okay, but he's a plumber. And so I had him do, I don't know how many things when he came to visit me, and does it lovingly and just a magnificent job. So every child is different, and every child really plays a different role in how they are dealing with it. And I'm respecting my son, who's dealing with it quite differently. And my daughter, she talked to my son, said, you better shape up and give your mom a call. Give mom a call. She's having a hard time. So twice a week I get a call. I mean, this is like, wow, So he took it to heart, and I keep him updated so that at least he's hearing what is going on. You might not absorb it, but he's hearing it. So they are both a blessing.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Jean, a lot of questions here are about, what activities can I do with my family member with Lewy body dementia? You do a lot of things with your dad. Could you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think it has to do with how mobile they are. Luckily, my dad's mobility is still, he's not falling. He does need a spotter, but that's me. So I try to, to what Linda, you were saying, I place a huge value on getting him out into the public. I think the more we can embrace people that are normally ostracized or isolated, like people with dementia or handicaps or anything, I have a great vision of dementia villages taking over the whole world, and we can all coexist together. But we do a lot of, I find things that he likes. We're very similar. I've spent a lot of my whole life with him. So I have that background. I know he likes walking at Golden Gate Park. I know we're going to maybe try to do a free lawn bowling lesson, although I think he'll just watch me do it. And we do exercises. I try to take him to the cafe that I like to go to. I think the key for me was lining it up with things that I want to do, because I was doing things that he would want to do, and I was getting really burnt out. Maybe just things that I don't bring me any joy. So we found this nice little zone of activities that we both really love, and I get so much more out of it also because I can have my dogs on our walk and we're enjoying it, and he is, and that's mostly we
That's
spend a lot
great.
of time doing that.
Great. Do you show any old photographs or describe old memories?
Yeah, I asked him, again, this is about his ability to go back in time to the like tiniest of detail. He can tell me about when he came to San Francisco in the 70s and why he did and with the people he did. And I think he takes a lot of pride in holding those memories, because he often talks about not having a sense of purpose anymore, and that's really hard for him. So we play to his strengths. He loves talking about those things. He loves talking about plants. He loves talking about sports. Sometimes the players are coming out of the TV, and that's bizarre, but we can usually circle it back to, well, what are they doing? And then he'll talk about technical details of what athletes are doing. So I think, again, to reiterate, if I'm enjoying kind of what we're doing, and we just get so much further in our connection, because it's not one-sided, it's a two-way street. So
That's terrific. Thank you. Lynn, could you speak a little bit about, I know Wendy attended an adult day program for a short period of time, Rosner House, I think it was.
She
Could-
did attend Rosner House, and it was kind of in a period when she was still recovering from Mirapex issues. And I speak highly of Rosner House. However, my wife found that most of the people there were Alzheimer's sufferers, and well, not really beneath her, but she tended to interact more with the staff than them. And when she decided she really didn't need to do daycare anymore, she was able to take the initiative to locate exercise programs in Redwood City and do those. And for quite a while spoke of volunteering to help with other people at Rosner House. That was, the disease goes up and down. That was a high point.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Let's see, we have a question here. I don't know if anybody can answer about air travel. Did anyone travel by airplane with their family member with Lewy body dementia? Jean, you go ahead.
Yes, I found the airports were really difficult. You have 2 suitcases and it's just very difficult to manage. We went to Cabo San Lucas in 2022, and that was our last trip. And I was really kind of glad to get home. He wanted me to drive him home. He was ready to come home. I said, I can't drive you home, but traveling, it's difficult for us at 100%, it just really, it's terrible. And so for them, for him, it was a workout.
I just
Robin?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Thank you. Stop. All right. Been getting the big cane, the big red cane. Okay. Thank you all to our panelists. You are all wonderful. Thank you so much.